Welcome to the Code 4 Couples podcast, focusing on topics for law enforcement officers and couples to keep you and your relationship connected, resilient, and Code 4. Now, your host, law enforcement expert Cindy Doyle, author of Hold the Line, and my wife.
Hey there, welcome back to Code 4 Couples. I am your host, Cindy Doyle, author of Hold the Line and law enforcement spouse, retired, and licensed professional counselor. That's all about me. Today, I have my friend, somebody I consider a friend, Jill Newman, on. I've known Jill a little while, and I keep threatening to bring her on the podcast. And we finally coordinated our schedules. You're going to wind up loving Jill as much as I do. She has a plethora of information about a topic that I struggle to find people to speak on. So let me tell you a little bit about Jill first. Jill is a licensed professional counselor supervisor, just like me, but she's in Oklahoma, just north of me, and currently works for Warriors Rest Foundation. She worked in community mental health and owned her own private practice for several years. She's a former educator and is trained in EMDR and trauma-focused CBT, also a Gottman couples therapist. So now you know another reason why we get along so well. She is passionate about both therapeutic and critical incident stress management skills as she works with first responders and their families to find hope and healing in the midst of their traumatic experiences. She's worked with Warriors Rest Foundation, the COPS Foundation, which is Concerns for Police Survivors, since 2017 and responded to numerous critical incidences. And she really enjoys working at COPS Kids Camp, which I think she just got back from. There's also a spouse retreat in like adult children that she works with that grew up in law enforcement first responder families. And she speaks on a bunch of different topics, but today I am having her specifically talk about kids in law enforcement. So, Jill, thank you for coming on. I'm excited that we were able to find time on the calendar that worked for us both because I know you are super busy as well as I.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And it's such an honor and pleasure to be here with you, my friend. I'm excited about just sharing all about law enforcement kiddos.
I know, I am too. I met Jill and I felt like the moment I met Jill, I don't know what it is. There's just people that you connect with. And even though we don't get to talk much and see each other much, it just seems like anytime that we see each other, we just slide into this groove. I think part of that is we're both so passionate about this field and this population. What I find interesting, though, is that you weren't in law enforcement, but you have this incredible passion for working with children or addressing children that are part of first responder families or law enforcement families. Where did that start for you? How did that come about?
Yeah, so a couple of things, Cindy. I spent most of my early adulthood working with kiddos, whether it be in education or my husband and I worked in children's ministry for a long time. And during that time, when I was working with kiddos as an educator and then in my early years as a clinician, I had the opportunity to work with a lot of kiddos who had been abused or neglected. And so in turn worked with the investigators. And I always was thinking like, what's happening with them? And so that's how I even started in the field. And then I had a wonderful colleague who introduced me more into the field. But I actually have family members who had parents who are in law enforcement. I have an uncle who is in law enforcement and his daughter is one of my best friends in the whole world. Just watching her grow up and seeing that. But I remember specifically in 2020 when things just really got to be more intense with law enforcement and just with some of the anti-police sentiment that we experienced and having just phone calls from parents saying, hey, what do I do? How do I help my kiddo? And I remember having some conversations with some of those kids that were saying, we are not invincible. We are not invisible. We're impacted too. And so because of my lifelong love of working with kids and then just opening that perspective just really was life changing for me to really look at. One of the things that I believe is that if we want to help parents, we really help their children and vice versa. That we want to give kids just a safe and happy home to live in. I believe that children truly are our future. Whitney Houston was right. I totally believe that. And so that was just it. It was like, okay, I want to help these kids because they need someone to help them. They're so underserved and
They
overlooked,
are,
and they need it.
yeah, it's, I think, underserved, overlooked, and not in the sense that I think families somehow see it. I think that there are concerns of the first responder and of first responder families, but I look at resources that are out there to address the situation or research done, and there's not that much. And so while I think there's concern, while I know people have reached out to me of, hey, do you have any resources? I know it's on people's mind. And there's not a parenting book for I'm a parent of a law enforcement kid. That there's not a parenting book for that. What are some of the common problems that you see with law enforcement or first responder kids?
Absolutely. The biggest thing that I see is that so many times people just assume kids are resilient. They're not catching
Mm,
on, and they really are. I've started informally interviewing adult children of law enforcement in the last 5 years. And one of the things that I found is that kids are reading body language. They're constantly watching and scanning the environment. So I think just being aware is a huge thing. And you're absolutely right. There are not a lot of resources out there on parenting. They experience the stress spillover just like
mm,
the spouse does. And also, there's just this family dynamic of where shift work really impacts the family because one parent is at home more than the other. So the law enforcement officer is not there. So the parent that is home really has to play that, if you will, good cop, bad cop, because they have to be the disciplinarian and keep things moving along, which can
right.
cause challenges in that relationship because are you the nurturer? Are you the enforcer? And so that's one of the things that
Mm,
really impacts the family dynamic. We know that law enforcement relationships, couples relationships can be impacted and the satisfaction of the relationship can be impacted. So then that also impacts the kids because they see mom and dad not getting along, their parents not getting along. And so that absolutely impacts them. And then finally, one of the big things that we see are these kids are often very hypervigilant. And people don't really think about
mm.
that, but I've had them talk about how they got seatbelt shears and things like that, and a good flashlight every year for Christmas, where their peers have no clue, or I knew how to call 911 before I knew how to spell my name. So they're very hypervigilant, and that actually impacts their friend circle sometimes because they don't feel comfortable staying at these people's house because they don't lock their door. They're not situationally aware. So there's just a whole plethora of things that happen. The other thing is that's been really interesting is thinking about a lot of our law enforcement officers have ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And we know that can impact someone depending on how many ACEs they have. And so looking at the research behind that, when our law enforcement officers have ACEs, and that's a beautiful motivator for the career, but then they become a police officer and they have their own critical incidents, and that impacts the
Mm.
family system. So there's actually some research that I'm currently looking at that is how the epigenetics of the ACEs can be transferred to the next generation. And so then if you do that, you have this child who's already predisposed to anxiety and depression because of the genetic component of the ACEs that the parent experienced. And then you have a critical incident that impacts the whole family. We're really looking at kiddos that may have a lot of anxiety and depression. And so it's just so important to know that on the front end to try to help prevent some of that and mitigate some of the impact of critical incidents on our first responder kids.
I know we're going to talk about critical incidents a lot, not a lot. We're going to talk about it in a minute. How's that? I want to translate some of the things that you said because you and I know what you're talking about, but not everybody listening may understand what you're talking about. ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale, is what the ACEs
Right.
is. You want to
Mhm.
explain what the ACEs is really briefly?
Sure. So the ACEs is a study that helps look at how likely someone is to be healthy and how likely they are to have different successful pieces of life, dependent upon what adverse childhood experiences they may have had before the age of 18. So it looks at things like, did they experience the death of a parent? Did they experience any sort of violence? Did they experience witnessing domestic violence? So there's lots of things that it looks at. And the higher that score is, the more likely someone is to be impacted by those events in their lives. And it not only impacts their emotional health, but it also impacts the physical health as well.
Part of the ACEs aspect that Jill's referring to is that I know this study exists, but I cannot find it all the time. There is a percentage, and I want to say it's 50% or more of first responders that have a high ACEs score. Having childhood trauma is usually can be a motivator to go in because you're in a way countering what happened to you. So I'll pick on my husband. He doesn't care if I ever pick on him. He was bullied as a kid badly. And he wants to go be a cop and like prevent bullying and get after people. So there's that aspect. Or if there was abuse, going and addressing the abuse or domestic violence. And so it's often a motivator for people to become a first responder because they want to serve, they want to make an impact in that way. So you're talking about the idea of family members, and this isn't just first responders, right? This is all families that could be impacted by trauma when there is a kid, and that spills over as an adult onto your children. You mentioned the word epigenetics, which once again, not everybody knows what that means. Do you want to explain that or do you want me to?
Sure, I'll give it my best shot and then you just jump in there.
Okay.
So, epigenetics is such an interesting field of study. And so, it's the study of how trauma and stress is then the trauma and stress hormones that we experience when we've had critical incidents or just stressors in our life. It doesn't, again, like Cindy said, it doesn't have to be just a first responder, it can be any family, but how the genes that are impacted by that trauma are then transferred to our children. I like to think about it like eye color or high blood pressure,
Mm,
or we say
mm.
that runs in my family. I like to think about it like that.
Yeah, I always think of it as what our body and brain learns is hopefully encoded in some way and passes through on our genes, which is why we're not starting from scratch every single time when somebody is born, right? There's a lot of great genetics that gets passed on, safety, security, those kinds of things. But when we have trauma, then our fight or flight experience is higher. And so it's more alert. And so sometimes that just gets passed on with genetics. And so all of those aspects, thinking about when you were describing it, I was thinking of layers. I was thinking of a Venn diagram where
Yes.
we have all these different aspects where the kids in our first responder or law enforcement families have dynamics where they can be impacted. I'm going to say normally, we don't say normal, right? But normally as a part of any family, but then some of these could be heightened or maybe more likely to play out as a first responder or law enforcement child in that sense, like the hypervigilance aspect. I thought when you were talking about that, I thought of my journey in this field as well, because I think when I started 20 years ago, people were still going and spending the night at other people's houses. And I think just general public wise, people don't do that anymore. But I know early on it was like, no, I don't know those people. You're not going to spend the night. And that was a part of the hypervigilance part. Or you better make sure all these doors and windows are locked. We better make sure the alarm is on. And once again, you said going to somebody's house where they don't have that. They're being exposed to something different. And the control can be a part of first responders' anxiety or the family anxiety passes on. There was a lot there that you talked about. I was trying to make sure to take notes, but I think we hit all of it. The body language was a good one. The sense that we think we're hiding stuff from kids, But those little tiny brains really adapt to figure out, what do I need to read in order to be safe? That's what you're talking about when you're talking about body language.
Absolutely. And then also, I think reading the parents' body language when they come home from work to try to see if it's been a bad day or not. I recently led a post critical incident seminar for adult children, first responders. And some of the things that they said were things like, you practice your yes officer face in the mirror because of the command present, and they want to be able to convince their parent of things. Not that they were being dishonest, but yes, it's okay. And try so the command presence really means a lot to them. And they talked a lot about just being interrogated and things like that, or having their friends interrogated. And so really learning to read their body language in the sense of, is it an okay day? Is it an okay time to approach mom or dad? Have they had a bad day? Or also, what's going on with them? Are they hurt? Do I need to shrink back and just not make any waves because I don't want to hurt them because I can tell that they're hurting? So the command presence really plays a part in that, as well as just normal body language and looking at really that adrenaline dump that happens at the end of a shift, and that withdrawal and isolation that can happen, that kids really watch that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that kids, and I think people as humans, right? When we don't have the complete story, we make up a story. And so that downside of hypervigilance and like being disconnected, and I'm 5 and I want to tell you a story, but you don't have interest. And so now I'm going to think
Mhm.
that you don't like me. Kind of, I
Absolutely.
have to think that plays in to a lot of different things, and the connection that maybe they feel to that first responder or don't feel to that law enforcement individual.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. I know you're looking at research, and you were talking about the interviews that you're doing with adult children of first responder. You just mentioned doing a post critical incident seminar that you had with them too. What are you finding in your interviews and in your experiences as you're doing some of this research?
I'm finding that there really are a lot of stories that kiddos do make up in their mind, and they carry that with them even into adulthood. And one of the
Mm,
beautiful things that I notice is that it's really a healing experience for them to understand the downside of hypervigilance, to them for them to understand how hypervigilance keeps their parents safe and how important it is. And that it's not just a choice, it's actually a biological reaction that happens in the body. And so I hear a lot of things like, I just thought my parent was a jerk. I just thought they didn't like me. I just thought, and so then as they come through those events and they're able to be educated about why their parent reacts the way that they do, it really just helps heal some of that in their relationship. And I find them having more compassion for their law enforcement parent. I find them having more understanding just about the family dynamics. And it's also very interesting because a lot of those kiddos then also are legacies, what we refer to as legacies, people who are also first responders. So it's been a beautiful thing to help them understand the importance of being able to mitigate these things so that they don't repeat some patterns that weren't so healthy for them.
that's going to be some good stuff. I love the idea of the like the face, the authoritarian spillover aspect, right? Oh, I've got to put on the correct face, and the awareness of that. When you're thinking about parents, our law enforcement couples, first responder couples, and as they're parenting these kids, what are some of the ways that we can do better? How do we
I'm so
help
glad
these
you asked that.
kids navigate that? Yeah.
I'm so glad you asked that because I think so often we can understand the what and the why, but now what do we do? And so there's actually some beautiful studies out of Oklahoma State University about PACEs, the positive and adaptive experiences that children can have that help mitigate ACEs. And so those are some things. And then there's also the family resilience theory. And both of those things talk about some things that we can do protectively to help prevent. So looking at it from a family resilience standpoint, the three main factors and things that parents can do are number one, have an organized home. And I know that's difficult, especially when we have a lot of unexpected call outs and things like that. But the organization of the family really helps those kiddos to adapt when something is off we can get back to normal because we have this family system that's organized. Then deliberate communication is a really big one for families to be able to be resilient. And then besides that, then the belief system, so looking at what are our belief systems about what happens to us? How do we approach things maybe with a growth mindset? So that's really what the family resilience theory looks at. And those are things that parents can absolutely implement in their homes to make those homes, those kiddos be more resilient, because it's not a matter of if a critical incident happens most of the time for these families, it's when. And so it really is about being proactive. And I love the idea of being proactive from the beginning. The other thing that PACES talks about, there's really two domains that PACES talks about. And they say that if kids have these experiences, these compensatory experiences, that they can actually have improved empathy, improved emotional regulation, and just resilience in general. Those are things like there's the first domain talks about being a part of a group, having a mentor, having unconditional love, having positive parenting, volunteering in your community and having social support, having a best friend. And those are all things parents can help facilitate. And I think that is the message that I really want to get out, that there is hope. I am so grateful for the law enforcement families who are willing to make the sacrifice, because truly, when an officer serves, their family serves as well. And I think it's the least that we can do as citizens to help support that. And that's one of the motivators for me, is just, this is the least of the things that I could do, but teaching parents, these are things you can do. The other thing that, and the other domain of PACES, is that enriching the resources that are available. So having safe homes, having hobbies outside of the law enforcement community, but giving our children hobbies, making sure that they have a good, accessible education. And then I know all the law enforcement officers would love this, having rules and routine. That's really great for kids. So even though there's not an SOP, we can have rules and routines. And I love the idea of having family values that we live by, and sitting down as a family and looking at that, and looking at the rules and routines and how we live those things out. So there's lots that people can do.
Okay. So if you were like, hold on, I don't have a pen and I need to take notes based upon what Jill said, I will have a blog, and on your device, you can click the link and it'll take you to the blog, and it'll recap everything that Jill just said. And maybe I'll even, I don't know if she's going to tag me some research with that too, but maybe give me a little bit more detail. But so that'll be there. I want to go back though to the family resilience theory, because as I listened to you, I thought, oh my gosh, that's going to be hard, because an organized home, because we already talked about the one parent shift work, all this stuff, chaos ensues. Like, it's really hard to have an organized home, schedules, do all the things. I want to recognize that, hey, this isn't about being perfect. When we think about an organized home, what I was wondering too is if part of that organization is schedules and things happening on a regular basis. This isn't just, are there dust bunnies in the corner?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
I would be in trouble if that were the case. I said, my home is definitely not perfect.
Yeah. That's why I was like, organized home. I want to make sure people don't interpret that if you have laundry on the couch, then you are damaging your kids somehow.
Yeah.
I think some of it too is that when we have a clean, organized space, that we do feel better. And I think also you're talking structure, right?
Absolutely. More structure than anything. Obviously, we want kids to know that there is food and there are clean clothes available for them. But no, less about perfectionism. And I'm so glad you said that, because when I really started looking at the research and trying to find a lens to wrap all of this around, that was one of my concerns. That was looking at, these are the three components that help a family be resilient. I thought, my first thought was actually shift work. Okay, but how does this work? Because we're teaching communication all of the time too to our first responders. So yes, exactly. You're the pro.
I just made a gesture because I was thinking that same thing. I was going to go there. Keep going. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I think what that looks more like is maybe there's a calendar posted and it says where we have to be and when, because that's some communication.
That's perfect.
That's clear communication.
Yeah.
That, hey, if something happens, this is our family code word. And this is who will be picking you up if something happens, which kind of leads into that critical incident thought. But it's having the communication that's there so that kids don't have to fill in the blank. Because as we know, if we don't communicate things, they will fill in the blank about all sorts of things. And
Yes, they
so
will.
it's that organization of we know that this is what our schedules are like, and we know that this is who will be probably picking us up from school or who will be taking us to soccer practice, those sorts of things. So that sort of organization versus everything being in the perfect place, because God forbid anyone look at my junk drawer. I don't know if that were the case, right? I definitely am so glad that you clarified that, because it's not about perfection, but it is about some effort to help these kids to mitigate some of the stressors that they're having, more so than kids whose parents aren't serving.
Yeah, I was also thinking about the deliberate communications. And I know I talk about rituals on a regular basis for couples, like having those rituals. And I'm guessing that's part of the deliberate communication that even the idea of, hey, this is going to pick you up, that's deliberate communication. So I
Absolutely.
imagine some rituals are important with that as well,
Absolutely.
developing those rituals with your kids, because that goes along with the being a part of the group, which I don't know if the other aspect was like relationships, but the enriching resources, that kind of all goes together. Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
It really does. So that is what the PACES study found out. And you can actually look up PACES out of Oklahoma State University, and it gives some really good research. Hasn't been done on first responder kids yet, so I'm hoping someday. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the fact still remains that when we have adverse childhood experiences, these things help mitigate it.
The last one of the family resilience theory, I thought might be the most challenging because it was the belief systems and the growth mindset.
Mm.
And we all know that being in this field usually brings home a pretty cynical mindset.
Just a-
Jill made the finger like just a little.
yeah.
Yeah. So, y'all, you want to impact your kids? Watch your mindset. That's
Amen.
a huge one, that jumping to conclusions, the BS and the a-holes that we talk about, and the
Mhm.
cynicism, all those kinds of things probably have out of the three, it has a third of the impact. I don't know if that's exactly true, but I'm making up. And then the growth mindset. So once again, staying out of that negative mindset and moving into what can we gain from this? How do we learn from this? Which staying out of that blame game, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Do you have
So
any other thoughts on
important.
the mindset?
Absolutely, because we know that two things can be true at once. And so while we
Mm.
know that, yes, there are people who have bad behavior, let's not call them bad people, maybe, I don't know, but just people have bad behavior and maybe they haven't learned to control that yet. And they're in the progress. And mom or dad are really helping the community by helping this person to learn that. So it's the power of yet. Maybe we as a family don't have this down yet, but we're growing in this family towards that. It's instead of having everything bad always happens, it's yes, there are things that are bad that happen, but here are some good things that happen too. And so it's really helping our kids to understand that two things can be true at once. Mom and dad can
I
be
love that idea.
withdrawn and not feel great, and they still love you very much. And here's how we know.
That's perfect. That's helpful. Good. Critical incidents. You just said a little while ago, it's not if, it's when. What kind of plans or preparation should parents have when to know that this is, in all likelihood, there's going to be a time of a critical incident? What do we need to do? What do parents need to do in order to, I don't know, they need to prep their kids, but maybe they need to prep themselves about how they're going to handle it or manage it. What do you recommend?
I think definitely having a plan in place of what the code word is, who will call, who will do what when something happens. Because I've heard stories of kids being taken to Aunt so and so's house or grandma's house, and no one would tell them anything for hours at a time. And their mind goes to the absolute worst place. And that's really unfair. And so it's being able to first and foremost look at where they are developmentally. And I think just as we have mission statements for businesses and we have business meetings. I love the State of the Union address that we talk about in the Hold the Line training. And I
Mhm.
think it's important during those State of the Union addresses, or even if we do those twice a year, that we're talking about where are our children developmentally and what truth can they handle. Because I think it's also really hurtful to tell them something that's not true, to make something up. And then they're not only dealing with the reality of what happened, but also now mom and dad are lying to me. They don't trust me. So, based on their
Yeah.
development, I think they do need to know. If you've got a teenager, they are aware that critical incidents can happen. So it's okay to say, if this, then this. And so it's really looking at where will they go? How will they know? Who will communicate with them? And then what needs to be communicated. One really great tool to use with kids after something has happened, when they're asking questions, if you're not sure where their development is, it's a great question to use an I wonder statement. I wonder what a kid your age might want to know about that. So then you're not giving too much information. They're telling you exactly what they want to know. They may want to know, how fast did you drive? Or they may want to know, did someone die? And so they
Yeah.
will tell you what they want you to know. But when you depersonalize it, that helps that communication with them. Because if you say, what do you want to know? Kids have an internal fairness scale inside of them, and they want to be fair to their parents and they don't want to hurt them. So if you ask a kid your age, what does a kid your age want to know? That depersonalizes, and it gives them permission to ask whatever they need to ask without fear of hurting you. And it helps to really, it helps to mitigate that anxiety that they may be feeling and the questions that they make. So I
I'm
think it's important to have that plan and then to look at where are they developmentally. And when we're meeting as a couple, what can they handle right now? Because that will change over time.
I have never heard that, and that is so important. So, what would a kid your age what do you think a kid your age would want to know? I love that idea of depersonalization because you're right. Of course, you're right. The idea of, oh, yeah, it's personalized and depersonalizing it in that way opens up the door to allow them to say whatever. And they might want to know this. They might want to know that. They might want to know blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I love that. That's a great technique and tool. And I assume you want to have some kind of a communication ahead of time too, with if they're going to go to grandma or aunts or something like that, grandma and aunt or whoever knows what to communicate as well.
Absolutely. So not only does the child need to know, but also we need to tell those people ahead of time, give them the G version or the
Hmm.
PG version. And because that's also harmful for them, because I've actually heard stories of kids who were taken to a family member's house and they now have this negative association with that person, even though they really love the person. When they see the person, they remember what it felt like to sit at their house for hours and wonder,
Hmm.
and that actually creates more emotional labor to not know what the plan is or what's going on for sure. So it absolutely is important to communicate that with your safe people. And I would say have more than one.
What are some signs and symptoms that parents need to look out for in their kids? There's all the regular stuff. We got to call it that, right? Then I think a lot of law enforcement parents are a little hyper focused on, oh my gosh, how is this impacting my kid? Let's send them to therapy. And and sometimes maybe they don't need to go to therapy. Maybe they just need a good conversation with mom and dad and a hug. How do we determine that line, or how do people determine that line of, ooh, this is raise the flag, maybe need to incorporate some help, or need to listen, empathy, hugs, and kisses? What are some signs and symptoms?
So I think any sort of major regression with younger kids, where we're seeing things like they're being extra clingy, they're not able to sleep, or the opposite, they're acting out really poorly. They're all of a sudden they're having all of these problems at school where they never have before, or maybe they've been a little bit more on the hyper end and now all of a sudden you just don't
Mm,
hear from them at all. They're withdrawing and isolating, because that's what these kiddos that I've talked to have told me that they did. So this is just based on lived experience with them, that they will tell you with their behavior. When they can't say it with their words, their behavior will tell you. So we always just watch those things. The other thing I think you have to look at with adolescents is, of course, at that age, parents become really not cool anyway. But when they start to exhibit some anger or even a strong word, but I've heard it before, hatred towards the law enforcement career, because maybe they're hearing things that are untrue. And so now they have questions and they don't feel comfortable asking. So they're going to assume, because we all know that our 13-year-old friends are the smartest people in the world and our parents don't know anything when we're that age. But but really that, because friends become such a strong part of our development at that age, it's really important to understand. And I think parents can get a better knowledge of that just by saying, so what do you think about mom or dad's career? Or what are your thoughts about what do your friends say? That would even be a better question. What do your friends say about this or that? Because then I think you're going to get a better idea of where they're coming from. Again, that depersonalization, it just looks a little different with the older kids. But definitely the withdrawing, definitely the being afraid of asking something, because I hear that often. I didn't want to approach them because I was afraid they were having a bad day, or I was afraid of them just in general because of the command presence. And again, I think it's so important that we talk about that conditioning that happens. It's not, now I'm going on a rabbit trail, I'm sorry, but it's not that parents choose that. It's they're conditioned to do it because that's what keeps them
Right.
safe. So it's just being able to navigate that with kids as well.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider. And the one thing that I hear primarily is if there's behavior that is not consistent with who they are, that may be a time to check in. And once again, the depersonalization question is the way you talk to them a little bit, maybe depersonalizing it in order to that opening up that communication. I would also think that having those rituals or habits that y'all have established, or the family values that suddenly they're off track. That's what you're saying. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you can even depersonalize the empathies somewhat. So I might say something like, I wonder what it would be like to be a kid your age and have a parent who's gone a lot. And that might be really tough. I just wonder. And I would just make those statements and see if that really opens up that conversation for them.
We're going to have a directory of Jillisms that you can use these phrases. I'm like, I don't have kids, but I don't think even if I had kids, I'd be like, oh, that statement would not come to me, whatever. So I love you giving us examples of how to depersonalize that, to take it off of, because I think that pressure on the kids of how are you feeling? What are you doing? Are you handling this okay? That pressure, eh, removing that pressure, I'll say it that way, removing that pressure allows them to just feel or do whatever. And even that removed empathy, I love that you said that. Like that empathy that's one removed, they can lean into that and have a conversation. That's awesome. What are other elements? Are there anything else that you really want to make sure that parents hear as a part of first responder or law enforcement kids?
Absolutely. I think that every kid truly does love their parent and want them to be their hero. And so I don't want to discourage parents. I think it's so important to think about, we have this gift that we know these things may happen, whereas someone in another career may have no clue that, they're going to have an accident at work. So we can really be proactive in that. And so I just want parents to hear, if they hear nothing else, that we can do some things up front, and their children are not doomed to anxiety, depression. Their family is not doomed. We can be proactive in these things and be able to just have a more resilient family overall. The other thing I would say is it's so very important to talk about what safety training that our officers have had, what things that are done proactively to help them. Just in general, I've heard some really interesting dinner conversations for first responder kids, but I think it's important to not just talk about the person that you saw or the blood and guts or whatever, but also on the other side of that, we have this safety training today. And do you know that I have this equipment that helps me with this So that really helps them to understand this is how my parent is going to be safe. Because a lot of times kids have this idea in their mind, oh, my parent's going to be out alone. They will have arrested the bad guy. The bad guy will have hurt them and they'll be alone. And they don't understand, hey, there's a radio they can call, there's backup they can call for, all sorts of things like that. So I think it's just really that goes into that communication piece of communicating with them. This is what is being done.
That's great. The idea of that there is safety and there is training and there is equipment and there is a team is a big part of that. And then I'm just going to circle back around to a common theme that I'm hearing that you're saying, though, too, is that this is resilience as a family. How do you incorporate family resilience? It's not individual, it's we are a team. You said earlier, and we all know that if you have an officer serving, so is the family. So we know that service comes as a family and that resilience needs to be as a family as well. Awesome.
Absolutely. Because the other thing that we know is that our officers are more safe if they are able to focus at work and not be worried necessarily about what's going on at home. And so it's having those rituals in place, it's having that communication in place. So it helps the officer to be safe, and then it also helps the family to function normally. And when that officer is off shift, they can easily transition right back in because these are the rituals. This is the way our home is organized as far as scheduling and the way that we do things. We just have a system and the way that things go. And that also helps that spouse to be able to have a little less pressure and maybe a little less resentment that may be there as a result of the extreme amount of time that the officer is away from home.
Jill, if people want to get a hold of you, if they have questions, if they need resources, how do people find you and get a hold of you?
I would love that. So it's Jill, Jill, at warriorsrestfoundation.org or warriorsrestfoundation.org, just on the website. They can click for info and I will be happy to answer any questions and help in any way I can.
And guys, I will put her contact information in the show notes below. If you are on your device, because let's face it, you probably are. If you're on your device, just go down there. You click the down arrow. It'll have the show notes in there. I'll have a link to the blog if you want to be able to have an article to refer back to. Her contact information will be in there as well. I know we mentioned Warriors Rest Foundation. That will be in there, but also all these ideas of the family resilience and how to incorporate the connection and stability and safety that your kids need in order to adapt to this environment. So thank you, Jill, for coming on. I really appreciate it. Like I said, it's been a long time coming. She's working on her PhD, guys. And at some point in time, I hope there's a book coming out. We'll see. I'll be nudging her in the background for you. So thank you for
so
sharing
much.
all your knowledge. Absolutely.
Thank you for
Thanks.
having me.
Guys, don't forget, I do have some freebies and some opt-ins information if you want to access it. And those are also in the show notes below. If you found this helpful, we do this. Jill volunteers her time. I volunteer my time really doing this. If you find this helpful, maybe there is somebody you think could benefit from what Jill just shared. And if so, I'm just going to encourage you to hit that little share button and to text it to whoever needs to hear it. Maybe your peer support wellness teams need to hear it. Maybe they need to know about Warriors Rest and what Jill does and the services that they provide at Warriors Rest there. If you found it helpful, let me know. Reach out to Jill. And guys, until next time, everybody stay safe and keep it Code 4. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us. For more information about the podcast or Cindy, check out code4couples.com. All intellectual property rights owned by CRLD2 Ventures, LLC, are protected by the firm of 9mm, 45 ACP, 5.56mm, and 12 gauge.